So good afternoon, welcome to this Observing One-to-One Reviews webinar with e-Memoir and FETN, the Further Education Tutorial Network. The session is going to be led by Dr. Sally Wootton, and we've also got Beej Kaczmarczyk with us. If you're watching this session on a video recording, you'll have access to direct contact with Sally and also Beej. If you've got any comments or questions, or you'd like to take this a little bit further, if you'd like to perhaps talk about Sally coming in to see you in your establishment, or you'd like to think about membership with FETN also. Yeah, so without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Beej and Sally. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, then. Thanks very much, then. Thank you. It's Beej here, and just by way of introduction, and Sally will say a few words about herself and the aims of this next 45 to 50 minute webinar. Just a few words. This is part of a series of webinars that Sally has been doing with us, and there are future titles to be decided on all those issues around tutorial, one-to-ones, and all of the things that are essential for retaining and obviously progressing our students. So Sally, would you just like to tell us what the objectives are of today's webinar?
Yes, today we're going to look at observing one-to-ones and just having a little think about why they might be different to teaching and learning in a classroom. We'll also look at the quality and impact of one-to-one reviews, and I think essentially we need to talk about feedback and how we can make feedback work for us in terms of improving practice.
And Sally, is it also a part of the objective today to say, look, you know, when you're looking at these sort of supported experiments, if you're doing something different, it's how to use all the findings from your own research and other people's research to improve the practice?
Yes, we can certainly do that, and I will make reference to the National Occupational Standards as well, which can be a very useful guide.
Thanks very much, Sally.
Okay. So just to kick off then, I think it's a good place to start in terms of looking at what tutoring is designed to do so that we understand what we're trying to observe and what we're hoping to see. So in essence, I'll just give you a moment to have a look at this and hopefully you'll recognise that this is the picture of tutoring in your own provision. As you can see, it's all part of teaching and learning, and it all feeds into that whole development of the learner. So what tutoring does is it just takes that personalized view and looks more closely at the individual and their progress that you can't do on a day-to-day basis in a classroom context. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you. So what do one-to-one observations tell us? There are a whole host of things that we can learn from observing one-to-ones. I mean, from whether or not they're actually taking place, and there are times when they're scheduled and you can go to a room to observe it and there's nobody there, this can happen, to looking at what's actually happening within those one-to-ones and the more effective overview of the system itself, how it's working across the organisation. It gives you a feel for the quality across the board, but it also enables you to give useful feedback to individuals who are carrying out this tutoring, and just to help them in a supportive and purposeful manner to look at practice and to see if there are areas where they might develop their own practice as well to improve the whole provision.
Sally, there's a question here about in terms of the sort of, you know, a lot of emphasis is being put on Ofsted and Ofsted requirements. But I think what you're also adding is this is going beyond. It's not just about because Ofsted want you to do it or Ofsted are going to look at this. It's the more intrinsic and much more holistic approach, isn't it?
Most definitely. I think we've fallen into this trap of we look at the, you know, whatever the common inspection framework is at that time, and then we try to map everything around that and design what we're doing around the framework to make it fit. And my advice to anybody is do what your learners need, do what you understand they need and how they need to be supported, and the development that they need to enable them to progress and to go beyond college successfully. And I think if we do that, we can map back what we do to the Common Inspection Framework rather than letting the framework drive what we do.
Thanks very much for that answer. Hopefully that answers the query by one of our listeners. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. So a lot of people say, well, you know, we've got an observation process in place. We do classroom observations and we've got a form that we use, and we go in and we use that form. But in all honesty, it doesn't really fit. And I think it's just worth saying that there are shared aspects, because one-to-one reviews are an integral part of our teaching and learning. It's the nature of the one-to-one reviews that make it different, and it's the nature of that role that we are in part observing. So we would, of course, look at it being learner-centred and a personalised approach in a one-to-one and also a classroom. We'd be looking for evidence of progress in both, and holistic development, learner engagement and stretch and challenge. And all of these things we would want to see in both contexts. But within a one-to-one review specifically, we'd be looking at what are the desired outcomes for the learner and whatever else the college feels that they need to be doing. You know, what are opportunities for disclosure? Are they being created? The nature of the relationship is significantly important, and the power dynamics within that. And the tutor knowledge and skills and their attributes are really significant, because quite often I hear people say, well, if you're a good teacher, you can be a good tutor, but it doesn't actually always follow. Not everybody has that skill set. You want to go on to the next?
Yeah.
So essential tutor skills, knowledge and attributes. Now, there's been a lot of research around this. I've done a lot of research myself, and then there's other findings from elsewhere. But in essence, this is what we're looking at if we're looking to see a good tutor in action. We're looking to see that they've got a knowledge of the learning process, learning support and welfare needs, that they can tap into those, they can recognise them, they can understand the kind of responses required. And then the referral processes, both internally and externally, to enable that learner to get the support that they need. In terms of skills, listening and questioning, they're key skills that a tutor would require, because a lot of what they do is about questioning and getting the learner to think, to facilitate the learner's reflection on where they are. Emotional intelligence, being able to engage in a pertinent way, and that conflict resolution where there might be barriers to the learner, or there might be behavioural issues that need to be discussed. And then the attributes, I've listed some of these attributes. Now, this is from some very early research that I did, looking at what tutors and students both felt a good tutor would be. And these are some of the attributes that a learner would be looking for in a tutor that they can engage well with.
Just a question here from one of the listeners. In terms of that person's management responsibility, they're often not, they haven't been given the opportunity to select tutors. Must be, it's a large number of students on study programs, and so very often they're given tutors. What sort of issues do you think that raises in terms of, for example, that mix of knowledge, skills and attributes? How do they acquire them?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's two issues there. I suppose the first one is, should we not be recruiting personal tutors rather than filling in a slot on a timetable, which is often what happens? It's about engaging with those right people. There is training available. I mean, FETN have done a very basic introduction to tutoring, which covers some of these aspects and some of the some issues around what the role is, understanding what the role is, the boundaries of the role. So there is that kind of training, and I think it's also about encouraging discussions within your organisation. It's very rarely that you find in a staff induction, if teachers are also going to be tutors, it's very rare that they actually discuss that tutoring role. So I think maybe we can do a lot more on an informal basis about understanding this. But I do appreciate that we don't always have control over, you know, the staffing within a department, for example, but we can sometimes better manage who's allocated to doing a tutoring role, and it might be a case of inviting opt-out as well, because what I've found in some places is that you know, some teachers would like more of a tutoring role, and some teachers want not to do it at all. So you can get that balance within departments and even within sort of course teaching staff to be able to negotiate that.
And just one other question. Thanks for that, Sally. One other question from one of our listeners. Do you think the context makes a difference? This is particularly from a provider that works predominantly with adults, mature adults. Do you think that makes a difference to the knowledge, skills and attributes that are needed?
I don't think it makes a difference to the knowledge, skills and attributes, but it will obviously make a difference to the approach of the tutor. I mean, I've done quite a bit of work around tutoring styles and how people can have a propensity to tutor in a particular way, whereas to broaden that out enables us to work the best way for a range of students. So, you know, there's a lot of, I'm quite happy to share that. There's a lot of work around that. So these are the essential skills and attributes, I would say, for all tutors, but how they are applied would differ in context.
That's great, Sally. So we might pick that up at the very end. Thanks for that then. Okay, so if we just take a little look at what makes a one-to-one review good or better. This is just an overview of what we're looking for, what we would like to see when we're observing a one-to-one review. I'll just give you a moment to take that in. I don't think there's anything particularly contentious here. I mean, one of the main things in terms of responses is, you know, I've got 10 or 15 minutes, how do I do all of this? And it's a matter of just ensuring that whatever is significantly important at that time is dealt with well, and that we pick up on any of these issues as we're going along. So it might be that you might have a number of reviews with a learner if you need to explore these things in more depth. So, you know, I'm not saying you cram everything into a 10 minutes that's on this, but essentially you need to be aware that these things need feeding in or picking up on where it emerges throughout the learning conversation during the review. There's a comment here on the importance of, you said, of motivation, and perhaps the comment is that maybe we don't spend enough time finding out what makes the kids, or I'm assuming they're talking about younger students here, what makes the 16 to 18-year-olds tick, what energizes them, and maybe that is one of the problems when we perhaps don't spend enough time doing that on an individual basis. Yeah,
I think that's a really fair comment, and I suppose to add to that, this is something that we can be doing in induction. We can be learning more about our learners in induction, seeing how they work, seeing how they gauge, you know, seeing what kind of gets them going and excited and through different types of activities, and we can use that information then when we're working with them on a one-to-one basis. It's a really good point.
And an additional point, a lot of these things that you've listed there are very supportive. What about challenge? That's a good question.
Yeah, very good,
Yeah.
very good question.
Not just,
Yes,
not just
yes,
about targets, but things like challenging behaviours, you know,
yes.
thought autonomy.
That's right. When I'm looking here at evidence, good behaviour and enthusiastic attitudes to learning, obviously where that isn't evident, then that would need to be addressed, and a good tutor would pick up on that and would challenge that. Yeah, but yes, it is important to highlight that. Thank you. Okay, so depending on who's in the audience today, you may or may not have already seen this. Apologies if you have, but I think it's worth revisiting in terms of it being helpful for you to know what you're looking for and those smaller quality issues, if you like, that you need to be identifying. And preparing for one-to-one reviews is a very significant one, because I find that in a lot of cases there is no preparation. And if there isn't any preparation, then you're not making the best of the time that you actually have together. So it's about ensuring that the learner is prepared, the tutor or the mentor is prepared, and that the information that is being gathered is being used well. So it's about that preparation and understanding what it is that we're going to do when we sit down together for that very short period of time.
Another comment here, Sally. We're getting quite a lot of questions and comments. Thanks very much. Comment
Fabulous.
here about how important this is, particularly for workplace tutors, you know, who are going out to see people in the workplace on apprenticeships, is that very often they don't see the one-to-one review in terms of this type of preparation. It's more like a tick list rather than saying, I should be looking at all aspects of that apprentice's performance and making sure I have a plan of what I'm going to look at on this particular occasion. So it's a good comment there. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's really important, because the individual should be bringing their agenda to this conversation as well. So yes, that's a really important point to make. Thank you. So in terms of the learning conversation, this is the heart of the one-to-one review, because this is where you learn about what it is that the learner's wanting to do, their aspirations, how what they're doing now is fitting into that and helping them towards those goals. And I mentioned earlier about questioning techniques, and it's really important that we ask lots of open questions, and that hello, have we got that? Thank you. That we're asking lots of questions that are open questions that get the learner to think about what they're doing, to think about their progress, what they want to achieve, how they might get there, and to get them to challenge themselves around the way that they're working if necessary. So that questioning technique is really important, as we've mentioned before in the skills. And then of course it's this thing about making sure that learning is taking place, what progress is actually being made, and how effectively does the learner know that they're making progress.
Another comment, Sally. Wonderful this, if the member of staff has got knowledge about what the person's learning should be. Some tutors are generic and don't have very much knowledge of the subjects that the individual is studying.
Yes, yes, I get this one a lot, and I think the point to make is that the tutor isn't a teacher, and where there are specific issues relating to their course, then it's about the learner understanding that knowledge lies with the teacher, and they should be having that conversation with them. We're about holistically supporting, developing, enabling the learner, but we're not about spending time teaching them. So if, for example, a tutor is falling into the trap of helping them with an assignment, that isn't what a tutor is meant to be doing. Because that, you know, the subject matter, the whatever the vocational or academic area, that is the teacher's domain, and they should be helping and informing the learner with that. And but you know, it's again, it's about drawing boundaries round what we're doing. So if we're falling into that trap, that's not what that review is about.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yep.
So planning, learning and development. So this is the, if you like, you're moving into your target setting bit now. So it's getting the learner to engage in the planning process. So are they motivated in terms of moving forward? Do they know what they want to do? Can they set their own targets? Are the targets aspirational and challenging? And it's trying to get, again, the learner to think about what their next steps are, how they're going to do it, to get them to think about all areas of the development, you know, not just issues about the course themselves, but about the personal development, and, you know, around English and maths, the working behaviours. And then, do they understand at the end of it? Do we get them to recap on what they need to do next, how they're going to do that, and that they understand the targets that they've set themselves? And remember, those targets are the small steps. So the targets aren't, I need to improve my attendance, or I need to pass this assignment. It's breaking it down. The targets are how I will get there. So can they effectively write their own targets? Do they understand what they are about?
And then a comment there for students at foundation level, that often means presenting their targets maybe in a visual way, you know, scaling, not to 10 and things like that.
Absolutely, yes. Pictorial methods are really useful. Yeah, there are a lot of resources out there for that anybody can use, to be honest, that make it more interesting, if you like. But yes, at foundation level, you would be looking at those kinds of things, yeah. And then, of course, reflecting on progress. So it's how does the learner evaluate their own progress? You know, can they step back outside of a one-to-one review? Would they be able to step back and look at what they're doing, how they're working, and see the progress that they're making? Because that in itself will motivate them. To what extent is the review itself capturing and evaluating the starting points, that evidence of progression, the skill and the various skills development?
Interesting. Another, I think, not yesterday, but the day before, at an event I was at, one of the providers there was encouraging the students to use not just RAG rating, but BRAG rating. In other words,
how wonderful.
blue, red, amber, green. I thought that was quite interesting, but it's quite a nice way of doing it. You know, those students felt comfortable bragging about how well they were performing in a positive, objective way. You know, so that was quite reinforcing of positive behaviours.
I've not come across that, and I think that's really wonderful, because we don't quite often, you know, say what we're good at. We're too busy homing in on the things that we need to develop, and it can be quite a negative process. So that's really great. I'll hang on to that one myself. I think I like that. Thank you. So when we're observing these reviews, we need to be aware of where there's potentially missed opportunities, and this can happen quite a lot, where, you know, a learner will mention something but it's not quite picked up on, and these tend to be the areas that can get missed, around English and Maths stretch and challenge. Career aspirations, quite often, you know, particularly where career aspirations might not be realistic and there is no challenge there, or exploration as to, you know, well, that sounds wonderful. If that's what you want to do, how might you do it? You know, would there be steps rather than trying to get there you know, in one jump? Are there smaller steps that you would take to get to that particular career aspiration? And building that kind of challenge in. Welfare and well-being can often be missed as well. You know, if a learner talks about not being able to get into college, or, you know, attendance is low and I've been unwell, and not really delving into what it is, particularly where there are patterns of this happening, not picking up on, you know, what are the root causes for what's going on here, but just accepting at face value that they can't attend, or, you know, they're late, or they're not handing the work in. There might be other things going on around that we can miss.
Yeah, comment there again about not always being aware of the referral opportunities, because I think the comment was not all tutors are confident with some of these issues, but they should be at least aware of who they can refer, with the, obviously with the agreement of the student, to maybe other agencies or other people.
Absolutely, because again, it's this thing around the boundaries of the tutoring role, and we're not there to resolve learners' issues, we're there to help them to resolve them. And what we don't do is we don't delve into areas where we're not qualified or skilled to deal with particular issues. So referral is significantly important. And again, quite often tutors are not prepared in terms of having the information to hand, you know, for support and referral. So, you know, I would advise, I used to just create every year a laminated A4 sheet with internal referrals and external referrals and contact details, and just, you know, little pointers as to if learners are showing these kinds of signs, or these particular issues, they're bringing these up, then this is the kind of thing that you can do. So it wasn't a flow chart as such, but it was just having that knowledge to hand, where a learner could go for that extra help. And I'm not saying that, you know, it's self-referral in all cases. Tutors can support learners by referring on if learners agree with that, but, you know, it's about enabling the learner all the time and not taking over.
Yeah, I think there's a one of the listeners said that's exactly what they do. They have those sort of help sheets also available on their phones, which I think is a good idea.
Yeah.
But I think another comment there is, we are not counsellors or health experts.
Thank you.
Remember that. Good. It's good.
Yes, you do get your pseudo psychoanalysts, I'm afraid, and yeah, it's a real danger, because it's not good for the learner, because they're not getting the real support that they need. So yeah, there are times we talked about earlier on, tutors having the skills and attributes. Well, it works both ways, you know. If a tutor's showing signs of, you know, I believe that I'm a parent or a counsellor or a welfare person, you know, these are all danger signals, because that's not what we do. We kind of just hold everything together. We have an overview and we support the learner to go to wherever they need to be to get the support that they need.
Yeah, good point.
Okay, so in terms of this observing, again, if we think about observing and recording, we need to know the context for that particular review, because every review is going to be different. So what is the context? And then it's important to capture exactly what you saw and heard, and from that you can start to build up a picture of what's happening. Also around the learner engagement, how engaged is the learner, and how responsive is the tutor being in terms of exploring issues, you know, and picking up on those little nuances, those little signs that all might not be well, or something needs developing, or even that, you know, a learner is bored and needs more challenge. How do we respond to these things? we also need to be seeing impact and recording what kind of impact was there, what happened, what changed, did anything in the learner's thinking or attitude or behaviour change during that review. In terms of reflection, how well the learner is able to reflect on the review, and to be able to say at the end of it, okay, I understand from this that this is what I need to do now. These are the areas I've worked on. This is what I'm going to prioritise. This is what I'm going to do, and this is how I'm going to do it. But we need to hear it from them. And that's why it's also good to see learners writing their own targets rather than having those presented to them, because they can do it in a way then that means something to them. They're more likely to own it if it belongs to them and they've created it. So it's about ensuring that through that review, this is what we're seeing, this is the process that they're going through, and this is what we're seeing at the end of it.
Sally, at this point, maybe just a question to our listeners. In terms of your observation of teaching, learning and assessment and all these aspects of tutoring that we've been looking at today, is your internal system of observation one where you use exactly the same approach for whether it be in a classroom or the one-to-one, or have you developed your own methods and systems for observing one-to-one reviews?
No, it's a different system for one-to-one reviews, and I think this is one of the most important things that I'd like to get out there, is the fact that it is different. It's a different process. It's a different kind of learning, and it's a different kind of learning relationship to a classroom context.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'm just checking because I'm assuming that no one's actually put their hand up to say they're using the same, so that we can assume that they've all got, they're taking account of what you've said, rather than just having a sort of one fit all. You know, which I think was one of the concerns we got. We got another question just coming up, I think. Yeah, they've all said yes, yes. We all have different, not necessarily covering all the things that you talked about, Sally, but we will improve. Well, that's good. Fabulous. Thank you very much for that feedback. That's
fabulous. And what I have found is the 4 pictorial slides with that's the handout that's been sent out. If you refer to that, I would hate it to be a checklist. It shouldn't be a checklist, but I do know that people have used it to formulate the observation of one-to-ones. So they've found the content of that helpful to review their own observation process for one-to-ones. So hopefully that will be useful to some people going forward.
We've certainly got lots of questions today, Sally, which is great.
Wow.
You're really engaged. Question here from Emily: how do we encourage the targets to be more skills focused and not just task focused?
That's a webinar in itself, isn't it?
I think we did that webinar on target setting, didn't we?
We did. We'll have to do one again in the future, I think. But in essence, for me, the most important thing about targets for me is that they should come out of the conversation. So as you're talking about the learner's progress to date, you know, any challenges that they have, things that they still need to develop, what they're going to do going forward, those targets emerge out of that conversation. So you know, it's not about going in with a list of things that you think the learner needs to do and then writing those and giving them as a list and them going away, which still does happen, sad to say. But in terms of, well, you know, sort of making it more skills focused, that will come out of that conversation, because a skilled tutor will introduce those elements into that conversation, in terms of if a learner needs to work on, I don't know, a specific piece of work, what skills are they going to apply to doing that? Have they got those skills to be able to do that? Is there something more that they need to be able to do in order to achieve doing that piece of work? So it comes out of that conversation through that questioning. Does that help?
Yeah, I think, well, thanks very much, Emily, if that is satisfying you. And I think the key point there is you know, it's breaking everything down into those very clear, whether it be communication or mathematical skills or IT skills or organizational skills. So it's that sort of, as you said, rather than just saying, have you done your homework, you know, or have you completed that task? We got a good question here also from Shabana. Thanks very much, Shabana. What would you expect to see regarding maths, which I think is very similar within a one-to-one? What would you expect to see regarding maths? And I suppose it comes back to the skills thing, doesn't it, Sally?
It does, and it depends on the conversation that's taking place. I mean, sometimes, you know, it can be picked up in terms of if they're struggling with a piece of work or an assessment that's got a maths element to it, you would pick it up from that. It might be that you're talking generally about attendance for a you know, if they're actually undertaking some kind of maths course as part of their program, it might be talking about that. It really depends. It's not about trying to falsely weave things in. It's just about making sure that within that learner's current situation and place in their learning, what is it actually that's the most important things for them. So it's a difficult one, because you could, you know, I know sometimes people get pulled up and they say, well, you didn't talk about maths and English. Well, if it wasn't relevant, why would you? And I think we need to be a little bit more realistic about that, particularly bearing in mind the amount of time that people have for these conversations. It's about talking about what's necessary and what's going to help the learner.
Yeah, I think there's a follow-up to that. Clearly, if the mathematical skills were holding them back,
yes,
for example, if they're doing engineering construction, that might become a theme that's repeated through several one-to-ones, not just one-off. So that would be something, as you said, that would then give you a sense of how that was a priority, rather than just trying to weave maths into every single 15-minute one-to-one.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, that's great.
We've got a bit scared about maths and English and all this kind of stuff, and trying to fit it all in, you know, because we've been told that we have to do it. But I think we have to take a common sense approach to the conversations that we're having with learners and make it about what's helping them to move forward. Yeah.
I mean, there was a good comment here that, you know, if you're preparing one-to-one for someone that's going to go on a work experience and they're concerned about the fact that they're not very good at doing the basic rules in maths, then that's them flagging that up, isn't it? So that would then require some kind of intervention. Yeah,
absolutely.
Okay, I'll just move on the slide to the next one.
Right, so we're not going to do this now, but you will have this presentation, and we'll make sure that you get a brief access to the link for the video. But basically, it's just about, if you take some time and you have a look at the handout that you've been given, and you think about the things that we've talked about so far in terms of what you want to be seeing in your one-to-ones, just have a little look at this and have a kind of a practice observation, if you like, and see how you can capture what's happening, record what's happening, and then you can think about the feedback, because it's the feedback now that we're going to go on and discuss. So, okay.
That video will be available, as we said. We'll show everyone the link, and then you can use these questions, obviously, to review what you've seen, and as Sally said, then prepare for the feedback that you're going to give to the tutor.
Yeah. Okay. So in terms of feedback, people get concerned about feedback. It can be an uncomfortable thing for both parties, and I think the most important thing is that we make it learner focused, future oriented, collaborative and supportive. It shouldn't be an uncomfortable thing. It should be a positive thing. And one of the ways that I like to encourage people to engage in feedback is again to ask questions. In essence, what you're doing is you're mirroring what you would be doing in a review.
Yeah.
So, you know, you would open up with perhaps what went well for you, what were you particularly pleased about, what did you think the learners particularly engaged well in, what might you have done differently, were there any things there that, you know, you thought maybe I could have done that in a different way or a bit better, what advice would you give yourself for next time? That's quite a useful question. And what would you like to share with colleagues that might help them? And quite often when I ask that last question, people say, oh, don't do this or don't do that, just as much as stuff that they've done that they'd like to share that they think went particularly well. But by having those, you know, very broad questions, you're getting somebody else to reflect on their own practice. And then you're not sitting there saying, you didn't do this or you didn't do that, which happens a lot in feedback. And that's just really negative, and it shuts people down and it makes people, you know, well, we're all the same, aren't we? It's difficult to hear critique. So if we can reveal it to ourselves rather than being, you know, having a list of things that we've done wrong, I think is a much better way of engaging in feedback.
Yeah, we got a comment here from one of the participants saying it's much more of a sort of coaching relationship, helping someone find the answer for themselves.
Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely it is. Thank you for that. And you know, as with any sort of coaching and mentoring, it's a conversation for change, which we look at on the next slide. So what we'd be looking at here is identifying what the desired outcomes are. So from that feedback, you know, what do you think the next thing is, and what are the priorities within that? Potential strategies and possible barriers. We ought to be looking at these because sometimes, you know, the difficulties can be quite practical difficulties. You know, it could be accommodation issues, finding somewhere to go to hold a review that's not being timetabled, for example. So there are all sorts of difficulties, some of which are practical and some of which we can manage ourselves. What the next steps are, what that tutor would like to do, work on, develop, explore, look at. It could be observing somebody else doing a tutorial or one-to-one review. It could be going on a short course. Whatever it happens to be, there will be things, and then those success indicators. How has what they've done impacted on their practice? And reflection and evaluation, and encouraging them to evaluate where they are now and what's next. And again, it's that conversation for change, mirroring the review process, and just enabling people to, in a friendly and supportive manner, because we can all do things better, you know, and if we come from that perspective, we're just working together to help each other. It's a conversation.
I think one of the, this is my sort of reflection on this, Sally, is that I think this is also about mindset, isn't it? I know we do a lot on changing mindsets and growth mindsets, but I think yes, it's also culture. You know, is the organisation one which recognises how important this role is, and does it give you the time and space to improve, you know, the way that we tutor? Particularly, as you said, when people, sometimes the barriers are physical and time and money and resource and things like that. But again, I think it's an important statement of the organisation's commitment to this. It's either going to do it well, or it's not going to commit itself to the resources and time that will allow it to work well.
Yes, and I'm glad you said that, Beej, not me, because I'm often talking in this way, you know, and I don't want to be overly negative about it, but there is you're right, there's a lot of work to be done when it comes to the profile of tutoring, understanding its impact on learners, and how well it can work to help them to achieve. So yeah, there is a lot of work to be done in terms of that recognition, so thanks for pointing that out.
And Emily just adds also in response to one of the questions I posed, but sorry Emily, I didn't pick up your question. Very much the one-to-one observation feedback is very much more about development. It's developmental. So that's
Yes.
that looking forward, as you said. So that's absolutely critical, isn't it?
Yes, definitely. And it's about removing the anxiety from the process.
Yeah.
And I suppose just on that point, one of the things that I often find is that the objectives of observations are not really shared with people that are going to be observed. And if there was some kind of conversation prior to an observation about how it will work, what the process is, the kind of conversation you'll have otherwise, and what you're actually trying to do, because as Emily said, it is developmental. You know, it's not about pointing out people's failings and you know, and all those negative things that people feel around observations. So maybe changing our attitude towards them, you know, and helping others to change their attitude towards them, like you said, Beej, with mindset is really important, and a job that we ought to be doing.
Oh, sorry, I'll go back.
Okay, so in terms of helping individual tutors to reflect on their practice, and this is kind of, if you like, outside the observation process itself to some extent, but it's helpful for maybe within the feedback to talk about some of these things. I'll just give you a moment to have a look. So again, we can be maybe considering these aspects, excuse me, when we're observing reviews, and then maybe if we're helping tutors at another time to look at this, then we have that observation information for those broader aspects of the tutoring role.
Yeah, we've got thanks from one of the listeners. A very useful checklist there, or points just to make sure we include them.
Yes, yeah, that's great, thank you. And I've just popped this up, the National Occupational Standards for Personal Tutoring. The information on the previous slide was taken in part from the National Occupational Standards, which have been out for some time now, and they are very useful if you share these with your tutors so that they understand the role. They're written in terms of you know, what the role is about and the skills that are required to undertake that role, but they're not a qualification. People read them, and because of the terminology, think it's a qualification. They're not. They're just guidance on the standards and, you know, what we ought to be trying to do within this particular role. So you know, when you see reference to units and things, please don't think that it's qualification. It's not. It's they're useful in a whole host of ways. They're very useful in terms of looking at the skill set for tutors and drawing up person specifications for the tutoring role and for the actual job descriptions for tutoring roles. And I know a lot of places have used them in that way and found them very helpful for recruiting tutors. And then obviously in terms of helping to reflect on the role. So yeah, we can share that. Can we send those out? If I send them to you, Mary, do you want to send those out?
Yes,
No
Marek, we'll make sure we get those sent out. That would be really helpful. Sally, just one question that's come from Mandy about graded. Do you grade observations of one-to-ones? And I mean, generally, I think from my understanding is I hardly see very little grading now of any types of observations, whether it be one-to-ones or anything else, very much because of what's happening with Ofsted. But your own personal view, grading observations?
I don't think grading is helpful because it's only ever the number that somebody focuses on, or you know, or the actual grade. So no, again, it depends on what it is that the organisation is trying to do. if they're trying to capture a sense of the quality, they might want to put a grade to it themselves, but they don't necessarily have to feed that back. It doesn't necessarily have to be graded. For me, it's about improving practice, but every organization's different. So, you know, I tend to work with whatever the organization uses as their the way that they like to do it. But having said that, I always have a discussion around what are you trying to achieve from observations, because if it's improvement and development, you don't need the grade.
And I think that's a key point that a couple of people have actually just commented, that they don't grade in their organisation because of that focus on development, and also because a lot of the observations are conducted by peers.
Yes.
So it's much more a community of learning.
Yes.
It's really useful. So how can we use it to improve provision?
Yes, lots of different ways that we can, and I'm not sure that we always use the information particularly well. Obviously, identifying, disseminating good practices is useful, and helping individuals to evaluate their own practice, which we've talked about. But also for me, it's about seeing this thing in action and picking up on other aspects around, is it working? You know, is the accommodation appropriate for a one-to-one review? Has the tutor got all the information that they need to hand, or do we need to develop more supportive mechanisms for them to use? Does the online ILP, if you've got online ILPs, does that work? Are they in a place where it works? I mean, I've observed in some organisations where there is no Wi-Fi, so they're doing everything by hand, and then they're having to go back to the office and fill in an online ILP because they happen to be on a particular campus that doesn't have the Wi-Fi that they need. So it gives an opportunity to get first-hand areas, you know, systemic areas, if you like, for development that management can look at to improve that process.
And there's a good question here from Lorraine. Are there any studies on the positive impact good tutoring has?
I laugh because I've been screaming out for this for years, trying to get some support to do a national. I've done a couple of small things, and I've got one booklet that I've written on the impact of tutoring in terms of how people have improved tutoring and what the impact of that has been. But these are only small studies that I've done. If anybody wants to kind of join in and see if we can get a bid in somewhere to do a larger project, I'd be very happy to do it, because I think that's what's going to convince the bean counters, because you and I will know that good tutoring enables learner progress, and it supports them in their it supports teaching and learning. But to actually have the evidence there is a different thing, and I've found in a lot of cases that the attitude is, where things are going well, it's good teaching and learning, and where it's not going so well, it's down to bad tutoring. So we can, you know, this is the kind of attitude that we can come across sometimes, and I think there's a lot more we need to do, but some good hard evidence to say this works well. You know, yeah, we could do with that. I'm sorry to say it isn't there at the moment.
I think in response also, in support what you're saying, Sally, there, in response to Lorraine, I think ETF, in terms of the training foundation and the outstanding teaching learning assessment, if enough of us think it's worthwhile, we could actually put in a bid for some kind of supported study, some kind of action research that might give us over a period of time some analysis of, if you've changed tutoring practice, what's been the impact? So that would be a good thing to pick up. I know there've been, as you said, Sally, some small scale supported experiments, but I think we might need something a little bit bigger scale and maybe over a longer period of time.
Yes, yeah, and I think that's the important thing is getting something where you can see that longitudinal development and impact, and maybe following a student cohort across a couple of years would be good to see where it, where they actually end up, and what the impact has been, and the impact on the support as well that they might get if where needed, because I think that's integral to it as well, is the take up of support when we refer, and the impact of how well all of that works together, because quite often you as a tutor will refer and then it goes into the ether, and nobody, because of disclosure and everything, nobody will tell you how well that student's doing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think that's another area to address. But you mentioned the ETF, and I know that they have done some small scale research recently on one-to-one reviews. I'm waiting for that to come out. I'm on the expert panel for professional development, so if people want anything feeding back, I'm happy to be that voice in that particular arena.
Brilliant, thanks for that. So obviously what Sally, we'll share Sally's contact details at the end of this session. So obviously if you want Lorraine and others, if you want to pick that up, Sally will certainly take the initiative on that. Thank you.
So we once again, we're down to the moving forward, and I think it's important for myself and Beej and Marek to know what impact this webinar has had on you, what you've learned from it. Has it been useful time? But more importantly, what are you going to commit to do next from the discussions that we've had? Is anybody willing to share that? Have we all got
No, Mandy's got Mandy's still thinking about the last set of issues. Can you recommend ways of gathering learner feedback from one-to-ones? Have you come across some good examples of how learner feedback has been gathered from one-to-ones?
But well, I just encourage, if there's something that's pertinent to a kind of a wider issue, timetabling often comes up. Access to certain kind of support can often come up, and I think where a tutor is aware of this, all they need to do is note it down, and if they note it down and they feed it back to line managers, then across, as long as that's all collected, it doesn't have to be another survey, it doesn't have to be a big thing, but it's more to do with people at various levels of the organisation listening to the message and acknowledging the information that's coming through. So if a number of tutors across a programme area are feeding back to that department that there's an issue, it's not about ignoring it, it's about picking up and doing something about it. Or if it's a wider organisational issue, everybody feeding that back up so that it gets picked up and addressed.
And would you, besides obviously the fact that we do these little surveys and survey monkeys and student perceptions, what about using college committees, where the students have got representation on them, such as the governing body? Would that also be a good way to collect sort of the more, summaries of this? Yes,
it would, outside of the one-to-one review. Yes, they're very useful ways. And I mean, something else that I advocate is where you just drop into group tutorial sessions and ask a couple of questions. What's going really well for you at the moment? Any particular issues or stumbling blocks that you're having, as a group. And by just asking those general questions, quite often you can pick up patterns. And it's not a big job to do.
Yeah, and I think one of the other answers there that, in response to that question, thanks very much for helping each other out, is that, if we have regular meeting slots for tutors where they can often compare and contrast those issues, then I think that's another way of getting it informally, which I think is really good as well.
Yeah, and it's so difficult and encouraging that kind of professional dialogue, because people don't seem to have the time anymore to get together. We don't have the big staff rooms that we used to do, you know, where people would get together at lunch times and things like that. All of that's, you know, gone years ago. So actually getting that opportunity to have these discussions, and again, maybe in, you know, your training days, your college training days, work best learning meetings, what, you know, actually put it on the agenda and start to create these forums for discussion would be really helpful. And of course you've got FETN for that wider discussion, and as members of FETN, you know, you've got the JISC mail where you can talk to each other, you know, ask questions, you can raise issues, and that helps me to keep in touch as well and to take things forward. So there are ways and means of having that tutoring discussion and keeping that going.
That's great, Sally. Thanks very much. So hopefully you'll take all the content from today, and thanks very much, Sally, for that. Excellent again. But again, look at the questions that she's posing, and you know, you might reflect on today. Reflect on today with your colleagues, particularly if you're representing your colleagues today. Take them back to the whole of your tutor group or your in your institution, and maybe look at some of those things, as well as share the slides, and obviously also have a look at the video that will be sent with you, which will give you an opportunity to observe a one-to-one, and then use the guide that Sally provided to evaluate and give, and then plan the feedback to that tutor. Sally, would you like to say something about the 17th of November before we finish?
Oh yes, very exciting. It's the FETN annual conference on the 17th of November. We've got some great workshops, a real varied pack of workshops this year, and some fabulous keynotes. And I'm particularly pleased, I have to say, that Gary Phillips from the ETF is kind of waving the banner, if you like, for tutorial at the moment, and he's going to be opening the conference with this talk about the importance of tutorial, which is great. So please go to the website, FETN website, and have a look, or you can search for the tutorial conference on Eventbrite and just have a look. There'll be some more details about what the workshops and everything are, but I hope to see you there.
That's great then. Well, thanks very much again, Sally. Thanks very much for all of you that listened in. Again, thanks for the contributions, the questions and the comments. Again, benefiting from a much more interactive approach. One day, one or two of you will pick up the microphone and pose your question or comment that way, but we really appreciate everything that has been done today. Again, thanks very much then, Sally. Thanks, Marek. And we'll stop the recording now.
Thanks, Beej.